So Kurt, we're to the point where you can call us to order.
All right. I call the meeting to order and roll call.
Kurt Walker, present. Jessica Kane is excused. Corey Zildesdorf, not heard from him. Charlie Harris.
Here.
Jack Kriz.
Here.
Todd Engel, not here. Abisha Stone.
Here.
All right. So next on the agenda, Mr. Chair, is the approval of the minutes from August 6th.
Do I have a motion to approve the minutes of August 6th?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Seconded.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the minutes of August 6th. All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
All against, same sign. The minutes passed unanimously.
So next up is some brief introductions. And so, because we have a few new faces. So why don't we, Patrick, why don't we start with you? You need to turn on your audio, Patrick. There you go.
Sure. Yeah, there I am. Can you hear
Yep.
me, everyone? Oh, good. Oh, hi. I'm Patrick Davenport, the new planning manager for Newburgh, and supporting City of Dundee as well. And it's my 6th day on the job, and and so far learning a lot and meeting a lot of people. And I come from the City of Sisters previously, and North Carolina and Virginia, and from back east and beyond.
Okay.
So good to be here, and thank you.
Robin, you want to introduce yourself?
I'm Robin Steele. I work for the legal department for the City of Newburgh, and I'm just helping out because we have so many Zoom meetings now with the commissions and everything. It was a little overwhelming for Sue to host all of those. So I took over the ones that are on Thursday night, which happens to be this one.
Okay. Kurt?
Kurt Walker. I have been a builder. We quit building 2 years ago. We've done land development, and then we own real estate in Oregon and in other states with some partnerships. And so we're still involved with real estate ownership.
Okay. Jack?
Yeah, I lived in the area since 1962. Was on the Planning Commission in Newburgh for many years, and retired from architecture business on June 30th.
Okay. Abisha?
Hi, I'm Abisha Stone. I work for Strategic Economic Development Corporation, known more simply as SEDCOR. I'm the Yamhill County Economic Development Manager for SEDCOR. So we're a private nonprofit economic development organization that serves Marion, Polk, and Yamhill counties, and we contract with the county for that professional service.
Okay. Charlie?
Hi, I'm Charlie Harris, and I worked for a long time for a nonprofit called CASA of Oregon that developed affordable housing, low-income housing all over the state, including a couple of units here in Newburgh, but mostly in smaller communities where there are a lot of farm workers. A lot of the projects we did were for farm workers and their families. Now retired.
Hey. Margaret?
Hi there, I'm Margaret Raymond. I'm with Echo Northwest. We're the consulting firm helping Newburgh with the H&A update. We worked on the H&A last year, and we're also working on the EOA. So glad to be back.
Beth?
I'm Beth Goodman with Echo Northwest. I'm your project director on the project. I've replaced Bob Parker, who either ran away to the circuit or retired and moved to Florida. I think it's probably retired and moved to Florida. Bob's still with the firm, but we decided that that we would switch out on this project. So so I'm working with Margaret on this one.
And Sue, Ryan's out there somewhere in space and time. So Sue?
I'm here. I'm I'm here, I'm just not on video tonight. This is Robin's first solo test tonight, and then she'll be on her own next week with Planning Commission. So I'm just here in the background, filing and typing.
Okay, thank you. So, Mr. Chair, we're now to that point to talk about the preliminary buildable lands
All right.
inventory.
And that looks like Margaret's.
I'm gonna share my screen if that's okay. So I keep it all, we keep it all in one PowerPoint. The host needs to allow me to share my screen, which maybe means making me co-host. And let me give Robin a moment or two to figure out how to do this. And we just had another person join us.
Uh-oh.
And we just had another person join us.
Yep. Beth, there you are. There you go.
Thank you very much. I won't abuse my power. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I won't.
There you go.
Okay. So you all, do we want to introduce Corey?
Yes, please.
Hi, my name's Corey Zielsdorf. I'm the managing broker for New Door Realty. We serve kind of the west side of Portland, including Newburgh. I live here in Newburgh. And I've been in business since 2003 as a realtor. Do mostly residential, a little bit of commercial. Yeah, excited to work with you guys.
All right, Beth, back to you. Oh, Margaret, back to you. Beth and Margaret, back to both of you.
Yeah.
Is the PowerPoint showing on your screens?
Yes.
Yes.
Mhm.
Okay, so I will run through the buildable lands inventory update process. So I think most of you were involved in the previous buildable lands inventory on the previous HNA, or you've been on the EOA committee, and so you're familiar with the process. But we'll just do a quick overview, and you can all ask questions as you have them. So our general methodology for buildable lands inventory, a BLI, is to create a land base of the land we'll be looking at. And so in this case, it's residential land. And so we already had those plan designations, which we'll show on the next slide. But what we did was update the land base using 2020 tax lot data. And so we did a quick, not quick, but a thorough check of plan designations and tax lot boundaries that may have changed since 2018 and reconciled those. Then we reviewed the development status. So that's the classification of that we'll go through in a little bit of vacant, partially vacant. Those are the two key ones to verify those that may no longer be vacant that were developed since we did the last BLI. And so that was based on permit data from the city, and then as well as aerial imagery checking. And then since some of the tax lot boundaries changed, we had to recalculate constrained area and then also calculate the new buildable area. Into the next slide. This shows the residential plan designations that we use for the land base. And so you can see them all listed here. Nothing has changed since there are some redesignations. The main change was the redesignation of Riverfront District areas that weren't in place when we did the previous HNA BLI. So that's the primary difference there. And so after we had updated that land base, we went through our definitions of land classification, namely, like I said, the vacant and partially vacant, and verifying that those were still accurate and reclassifying them to developed. That was most of the cases where it was classified as vacant before and now it's developed. Verifying all of that.
I have a question.
Sure.
On the lots fully developed consistent with current zoning, does that, like if we're going to have duplexes allowed on single family lots, how's that Is that included here somewhere?
That would come in, Beth, you can correct me if I'm wrong, more when we're doing the allocation of capacity. Beth, do you want to elaborate on that at all?
Sure. What we're trying to get to right here, Charlie, is just an idea of acres of vacant or partially vacant, unconstrained land. Figuring out how many units that land can accommodate is in a step that's beyond what we're talking about this evening.
So for example, if there was a lot that's say 7,500 or 10,000 square feet and it has a single family home on it now, is that considered fully developed?
Is that consistent with the development, the lot sizes in your zoning code at this point? I haven't been through the zoning code, whereas Margaret, I think, has, and Doug certainly is more familiar with it than I am.
Yeah, I remember touching on this on the last meeting, and Doug mentioning when that doesn't actually come into effect until June or July of 2021. Am I right about that?
That should be true. Doug, you're muted.
Thanks, Beth. So Charlie, if you had a 7,500 square foot lot that's got a single family home, it's considered to be fully developed. The issue about House Bill 2001 and duplexes, as we talked about at our last meeting, was that the provisions of that in compliance do not need to occur until the end of June of 2021. So they don't factor into this HNA. His last meeting in August, you said, well, that means we'd have to come back and do another HNA later. And my response was, yes, you know, somewhere down the road, the city's going to have to do another HNA. Right now, we don't know what the standards are going to be. There's a model code that's out for duplexes. I think they just had the hearing on the other middle housing last week. Was that earlier this week or last week? I can't remember. And we have a separate consultant on board who's working with a separate citizens committee who'll be working through all of the duplex and all of the other middle housing regulations. But again, Charlie, the first step of that is duplexes, and we won't have that work done until the end of June of 2021.
And in any case, you wouldn't necessarily assume that that single family unit on that 7,500 square foot lot would have a new duplex. Occasionally, you'll probably get units that are torn down and maybe a duplex built, but that's not going to be what you're going to see likely all over the city. For developed land, we think this will affect, the House Bill 2001 rules will affect developed areas and existing neighborhoods slowly over time, and maybe very slowly over time.
I think I saw what the draft said was you could assume that for lot sizes of, I think, 7,500 feet or less, there'd be a 1% growth in the, duplexes would show up on 1% of those, and for larger lot size, it would be 3% more. But
again, Charlie, this is all getting to House Bill 2001. House Bill 2001 does not apply to the work that we're doing on the HNA.
well, and can we disagree with that? And what do we disagree?
Sure, you can disagree with it, but we don't have any regulations to apply at this point. There is an administrative rule that lays out a process that we have to go through an evaluation to determine that, but that work will not be done until the end of June of 2021.
Well, why don't we just put off this until then?
Because I have to have an updated BLI to Department of Land Conservation and Development by the end of February of 2021.
And you can't base your buildable lands inventory on policies that are not yet adopted. So the basis for assumptions have to be policies that are already adopted.
Okay. Sorry, go ahead.
Okay. Does anyone have any other questions about how we classify land? This is the map Beth was just showing is ultimately how the classifications pan out across the city. Does anyone have any questions about classifying land?
And I will say that the underlying assumptions for the classifications have not changed between the 2019 buildable lands inventory and now.
Right.
I do have one question. I don't know how valuable it is other than to satisfy my curiosity. But under undevelopable lands, if you had multiple 3,000 square foot tax lots that were adjacent to each other, would that still be under the underdevelopable? Or would that be looked at as like to be somehow reassigned into a larger tax lot? I mean, how would you address that scenario? And I guess if we don't have any of those, maybe it's not important. I'm just curious how that works.
Yeah. So the reason we have this category is mostly for housekeeping purposes and GIS to make sure we're not including anything that's just, GIS can create weird polygons that aren't actually tax lots when you intersect some things together. So I didn't run into that case in Newburgh, but we usually use that threshold so that it's well below or at like a minimum lot size threshold. Certainly when we do our rapid verification of aerial, we would look at something like that. I don't think there's any cases of that in Newburgh.
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you, Margaret.
Yeah. That's something we would certainly flag though. It happened.
I have a question.
Sure.
In relationship to buildable lands inventory, is there a way to look at existing utility trunks like sewage lines and pump stations in relationship to the inventory that's available to see? And then I guess along the same lines is, do we know what different pump stations are as far as their capacity currently? And if you bring in additional buildable lands, how that's going to impact having to put another one in, and where those would be? And
Corey, that really goes beyond what a buildable lands inventory does.
But it also does tell us which lands could come in sooner than others related to existing infrastructure.
Certainly, and if the city has the information about its infrastructure digitized, then the city could use the buildable lands inventory in future capital improvement work to decide where to prioritize future investments. And in some cases, cities will look at where they've got large areas that are potentially developable that are not serviced entirely. And the buildable lands inventory in the regular course of planning can be used to help on that work. However, in the buildable lands inventory itself, that's not a step that we go towards. This is a way that the inventory could be used by the city in its future planning.
And I would say Corey is an example of that. Springbrook Properties. It's within the UGB. When you look at the inventory itself, it has lands that are identified as partially vacant and totally vacant. There's an entire master plan for that infrastructure.
Yes.
And as part of that, we have a 5-year capital improvement program. We also have our functional plans, transportation, sewer, water, storm, and wastewater. And we have capital projects identified in the 5-year period and beyond where we would use SDCs to extend infrastructure to lands that are within the existing UGB to provide capacity so that those lands that are identified as vacant or partially vacant can be developed in the future, in addition to the developer providing infrastructure improvements to support their development.
Oh, okay, got it.
Is there a way to overlay the development status map with the comp plan map?
That's in just a few moments, Charlie.
Yeah.
Okay. It wasn't in the material, so good.
Well, it is in some form in a few slides. So this is showing development status with the constraints overlaid in a hatched black line. So just it's the previous slide, those definitions, and then the results of us applying those definitions and then also reviewing updated information from the city. So,
Margaret, what are the development constraints? Are they on the next slide?
yep, they're on the next slide. So these are the constraints we applied in the VLI. So we have streams, floodplain, floodway, wetlands, steep slopes, and the landslide hazard. So this is the same as the previous VLI. And then what we do is we take these two maps together and come up with this map. So this is Charlie sort of getting at what you were asking. So it's showing any land that we've designated as vacant or partially vacant, and then applying the comp plan designation, and then overlaying the constraints in white. So you only see the available buildable land. For partially vacant parcels, we do show the whole parcel. So there's probably a little bit more land here shown than is actually available, but that's just how it works with the GIS data. So getting as close as we can to showing what's actually buildable unconstrained land.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And so this is that map in table form. Should look familiar if you've looked at the previous H&A. And so the main difference here after applying the new building permits that happened since we did the last BLI, which showed 675 buildable acres, we're now showing 643 acres as buildable. And so there were permits kind of across the board in the base plan designations. So low density residential in the previous BLI was 209 acres, whereas now it's 188. Medium density was 96 and now is 71. High density was 15 and now it's 13. And public quasi-public had 1 acre last time, so that got developed. And so those are the main differences to account for the change.
Can we?
Springbrook stayed the same. Go ahead.
Is it possible to show how many, like, for example, the 2018 H&A showed 209 acres of LDR and now we're down to 188.
Mm-hmm.
How many units were actually developed in those acreages? The difference, for each of the different categories? Just so we have a better idea of what recent development patterns are?
That's information that we could bring, I think, but we don't have tonight.
No, I'm not asking for it tonight, no, but just for future reference.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah, that might be something that we footnote on here, and we update the information about building permits in the housing needs analysis.
Okay.
So that's what we have on the buildable lands inventory. Do you guys have questions about it? The pattern that we've done here of not changing most of the assumptions, but updating the information is the pattern that we're using for as much of the H&A as possible.
That makes sense, Beth. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to go on then and take us into talking some about the demand part of the housing needs analysis.
Oh, can we well, is this the time when we should talk about the Riverfront District and why? Because the acreages that are shown here for residential are quite a bit less than what's shown, as I said, in the September 2019 alternatives. What happened to all those acres?
I think that is probably a Doug question. And I think the easy answer is that the Riverfront District has been undergoing some changes to the master plan. And so some land has been redesignated.
In the Riverfront Master Plan, there was some of the West Rock Mill site that was identified as medium density residential. It was on the south side of the bypass. And that's being reclassified to industrial because you're not going to sandwich between industrial, a one lot and try to build a house between the bypass and an industrial complex. And we've talked to the Fair Housing Council about that as well, so they were aware of it. Then we took to compensate for that loss of that medium density. We identified some high density residential down off of 14th Street in College. There's about 3.5 acres or so, Charlie, there. I'd have to look back specifically at the plan. Then we've got some stuff that's been developed as well since we adopted the Riverfront Master Plan that's captured in the BLI. So we've had some apartment land that was developed. We've got some subdivisions that are now building houses. And that's basically the River Run subdivision down off of Weatherly Way.
So does all that explain, like, I think in the draft I was looking at, there were like 114 acres of residential, and now we're down to 22.
Well, the Riverfront Master Plan, the final document, is on the website under the project webpage. And there are tables in there, but you have to remember those tables were looking at an area that was 460 acres in size. And in the riverfront, then we were extracting out, we were getting to the net for what was actually the residential land. And the consultants for that project were then trying to take out the Goal 5 resources. So some of the numbers in the riverfront plan may not be exactly what you see in the HNA, but the HNA is actually more accurate because it's gone down to, Margaret put together maps. I went through all of those. No, this lot's been developed, this lot's been developed, this lot's been developed, this lot's been developed, and we cleaned all of that stuff up. So the Riverfront Master Plan is a very high level document. It's the vision and the concept of what we want to have. And as I mentioned earlier, is that we are going to Planning Commission on October 8th and City Council on November 2nd. And we will be holding public hearings to actually adopt comprehensive plan text changes, map changes, development code changes, and zoning changes to implement the Riverfront Plan. And what Margaret and Beth did is when we went through that, we took all of the changes that we are in process of working on and reflected those in the HNA BLI for residential.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions about the buildable lands inventory?
No?
Oh,
Okay.
well, sorry. The Springbrook plan, the Springbrook district shows mid-rise residential and village residential. How does that, how do those equate to medium density and high density? What does village residential require?
So Margaret, you want to talk about how we address the issue of the Springbrook District Village? Because we were trying to make sure that we did not double count between what we're doing in the EOA work and the HNA work.
Yep. So the way we took the Springbrook district in the HNA is that we ultimately, when we're assigning capacity, we don't use the acreages listed here. We use what's in the master plan in terms of the number of dwelling units. So we override any capacity. So I'll back up a little bit. When we show our capacity, not at this meeting, but at the next meeting, for things like low density or medium density residential, we'll do a calculation based on buildable acres and an assumed density. So for example, I think low density residential has an assumed density of 4.9 dwelling units an acre. So we use that, we use the buildable acre number there. For the Springbrook district, we use our ultimate capacity number is based on what's in the master plan. And so if I'm recalling correctly, there's a split in village residential of some of it's single family detached and some of it's single family attached, and some of it might even be multifamily. And so we use those dwelling unit capacity numbers from the master plan versus relying on the buildable acres here, so that we're not double counting anything.
That makes sense, Charlie?
Yeah, so is there any high density residential included in the Springbrook district, one either through dwelling units or whatever?
No. So what you have is in the Springbrook district, you have the medium density, which is up off of Center Street and Mountain View. And there's approximately 15 acres in there for medium density. And then you have the Springbrook District Village, which Margaret just explained. The balance of it is low density residential,
Okay, thanks.
which is in the lighter green.
And so I'll just add that what's in the previous HNA, those are the same numbers we'll be using for this. That won't change. And so we'll present that at the next meeting.
Thank you.
Charlie, do you have any other questions about the buildable lands inventory?
No, thank you.
Okay, no worries. Anybody else have questions? All right, I'm going to take us then on to the preliminary housing forecast. So the big change in the analysis is in the population forecast. Portland State University gave Yamhill County a new population forecast on June 30th, 2020. From now until 4 years from now, when the next forecast is done, that's the population forecast you have to build from. So right now we're looking at a 2021 through 2041 planning period, rather than 2019 through 39. And we see that over those 20 years, we're looking at 7,995 new people. The prior forecast showed 10,819 new people. So that's a decrease in the forecast of 2,800 new people. So that's the biggest change of anything that we'll be looking at. When we take people, that's 7,995, and we convert that into new dwelling units, we use the same methodology that we used in the prior housing needs analysis. We've adjusted some of the census information to the most recent version of the census. So for instance, the average household size in the prior housing needs analysis was 2.62 persons per household. In the current most updated census, it's 2.61. The vacancy rate was 5.3%, and here it's 5.5%. We also adjusted the percentage of people in group quarters ever so slightly based on the newer census data. We use the newest census data in large part because it's the newest and most best available data, but also for some of these things like vacancy rate and household size, it is a safe harbor assumption. And to do the safe harbor assumption correctly, you have to use the most up-to-date census data. Those very minor differences didn't change the forecast all that much. It was the big change in population that made the big difference. So here, over the next 20 years, we're looking at 2,998 new dwelling units compared to the 2019 forecast of 4,035 new dwelling units. So that's 1,037 dwelling units lower.
Hey Beth, I I have what I hope is a quick question, at least feel free to give me a quick answer. Do you know why there was a decrease? So I haven't seen data showing decreases from previously expected increases in population. Is it regional? Is it state? Is it a statewide formula, or is there some sort of a reason behind that that you can share?
So Portland State University doesn't tell us the reason. They don't tell us why was the old forecast this and the new forecast, in my opinion, significantly different. I don't know. I do know that in their more recent forecasts for various counties over the last few years, their forecasts have generally speaking been lower than they were in the previous cycle of forecasting. So Newburgh is not the only city where I've seen the forecast go quite a few thousand lower, and I don't know why.
Yeah, and so I've talked with McMinnville because their forecast was lower. Basically, all the cities in Yamhill County, their forecasts were lower. Part of that, so some of the briefings I went to was aging population, death rates, lower birth rates are occurring. Now, those are just what they said when I went to the briefings. If that's all of the reasons, like Beth, I don't know all of the answers. But when I've talked with colleagues around the state, in the different regions, most people's or most communities' numbers are lower this round than they were in the first round.
Interesting, thank you. I was curious if there was some sort of a response, like a decreasing in migration or something like that, but I understand that's kind of a loaded question because you're not the one who generated the data, but I appreciate the response.
So I was looking at this issue in a different context for the city of Salem recently. And what I've found around Salem and Marion County was that growth rates for Marion County were almost dead on the same as growth rates for the state, which were almost dead on as the same for growth rates for the nation. And that was since 2000 or since 2010, because I was looking at some different periods. So I do know that PSU, they use a cohort component model for their forecast. So they look at birth and deaths. And that's a very precise sort of model. If we lived in Utah, where most of the population growth results from natural increase, then that would be a very good model. In Oregon, most of the growth results from in-migration. So more than half, more like 2/3 across the state. And so PSU also adds in forecasts in migration. And I'm not sure what the change in drivers were, if there were any around in migration. Are there other questions about the forecast and the forecast for number of new units?
Can you explain what group quarters are and why they're taken out of there?
Sure. Group quarters are things like dormitories, jails, prisons, certain types of nursing homes where you've got congregate living, and they're taken out of there because those they typically need different types of land. So they aren't typical housing units. We account for group quarters and land for group quarters much later in the study, assuming that group quarters develop like multifamily housing, because that's generally the density that they do develop at. So they're just not in existing, they're not in future housing units. And we assume the same percent as currently in the city will be over the next 20 years. So
I was thinking of it as group homes, like for
no,
disabled folks. That's different.
That's different. That's generally speaking similar to dwelling units that you might have built around the house, around the city. So no, small group homes, that kind of thing. Those are in the population.
And so when it comes to land allocated to those, that's going to be in public and semi-public, or where's that?
No, land allocated to those comes in later on in the process when we're looking at land sufficiency. We assume those 577 people are essentially in housing that will develop at densities like your high density. So those come in just later in the analysis. We'll show those pretty clearly. And you can see land for group quarters in some of the tables later in the 2019 H&A. I can't tell you what table off the top of my head, but they should be shown in there.
Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm. Are there other questions?
I have a comment.
Certainly.
In residential real estate, where there's discussion about rural population trends with COVID changing because of people moving out of urban centers into rural environments more. So if it continues, we're just watching. People are watching that trend.
Certainly, and I would consider Newburgh not an urban center. I don't know if you would consider Newburgh.
Yeah, I wouldn't either. Yeah.
Oh, all right. So there's that kind of thing that one could term a short-term trend that'll happen over the next year or two. And then there are a lot of people who want to talk about climate change refugees, which was the subject in Salem, which I don't see at the highest level a lot of evidence that that's happening to in-migration in Oregon at this point. But that's certainly a speculative long-term trend that is not being taken into account in the forecasts. There's lots of ways in which these forecasts can change. And that's why they're being updated every 4 years. And that's why, as Doug says, you'll have to redo your housing needs analysis at some point. Are there other questions? Okay. And so then we go about putting these dwelling units into different unit types. So single family detached, single family attached, and multifamily. And multifamily includes everything from duplex on up to apartment buildings. The percentages that we use here, the 60, the 8, and the 32, those have not changed from the 2019 housing needs analysis. So those are the same. And then we're just showing some information that'll be more useful a little bit later in the housing needs analysis, but we're continuing to assume that 20 of the new single family detached units will be accommodated through accessory dwelling units. And that's based on historical development of accessory dwelling units. And essentially those 20 single family detached units, they're not going to require land that's in addition to any other single family detached, because you'll either have an ADU developed with a new unit or an ADU developed with an existing unit. And then we've also factored in redevelopment of 100 units of multifamily, and that's based on the city's downtown plan. And if you have questions about that, I may need to refer that to Doug. In the prior analysis, we estimated between 60 and 140 new units of multifamily might be redeveloped in the downtown based on the downtown plan. And so we simply subtract these from this previous slide. So the 1,799 decreases by 20, and it becomes 1,779, and the multifamily decreases by 100. These are units that are going to acquire new vacant land.
Can I ask Doug whether the 100 units of multifamily in the downtown plan, is it all consistent with the Butler property proposal?
Doug, you're not muted.
I said, Charlie, nice try. The Butler property is under evaluation.
Oh, Doug is saying he's not going to divulge more information, I think, than that.
Well,
It's covered under executive session privilege with council, so I can't talk about the Butler property.
Well, if we were going to plan on 100 units being taken out or, you know, for the downtown plan, where's that number? How does what? Maybe you could explain a little bit about the downtown plan and where that number comes from.
So the consultants we worked with at the time, so this was back in 2015 and 2016, we looked at redevelopment opportunities within the downtown area. The primary focus of that redevelopment is along 2nd Street between River Street and Grant Street, essentially. So think of it from Naps. Let's take from Main, you know, from Main to River Street and redeveloping that. We also looked at the opportunities to provide some units on 2nd and 3rd or 4th floors on other lots that are not developed in the downtown at this point. They're basically vacant parking lots. And the consultants gave us a range. And when we did this in 2019, we selected a point. What has occurred since the 2019 is we did have a 20-unit apartment project that was constructed on 2nd Street. So that affected that multifamily number. So again, the numbers that we're using for multifamily in the downtown come from another plan that has been approved by the city.
And primarily are for redevelopment of 2nd Street properties.
Primarily 2nd Street.
Okay,
Yep.
That's good to know. Thank you.
Are there other questions about this part of the housing needs analysis that we presented? So what our next steps are going to be is going to be looking at the estimate of capacity of your vacant land. We're going to use the same assumptions that we've used. Pardon me, I just wanted to check chat and make sure there's no issue. We're going to use the same assumptions about density that we used in the 2019 plan, and figure out how much, whether we have enough capacity of your vacant land to accommodate the forecast for new housing. So again, we're not going to be changing the really key assumptions and trying to change assumptions right around the margin where we have to. And I'm going to go on and talk about vacant and partially vacant land, not vacant, not that, public and semi-public land in a moment, unless anybody wants to talk more about the housing needs analysis. All right, I see no enthusiasm for housing needs. So, well, you know. So then we're doing an economic opportunities analysis, and that's getting a good idea of how much commercial and industrial land does the city need. And the housing needs analysis gets at how much land the city needs for housing. And in both of these, we have ways to incorporate land need for rights of way. So for new streets, through assumptions about net and gross density, where net density is when you look at each tax lot and you say, on that little tax lot, that's how many dwelling units we got. But you know, when you look at a bigger area, it includes streets. So we account for the land needed for streets through density assumptions. But we're not accounting for land needed for other public and semi-public uses. The biggest of those are going to be parks and churches. And so what we're doing here is a little tiny analysis, looking at other public and semi-public land needs. So land needs for things like municipal land needs, city, state, county. Land needs for schools. Schools need land that's very different than any other type of land that you see used for, say, commercial or industrial or residential. For parks, again, park land is very different. And semi-public uses. And most of the semi-public uses are things like churches and cemeteries, that kind of thing. And so what we do to come up with this estimate of public and semi-public need, which we'll run through a little bit in a moment or two, is some combination of asking other agencies what they need, looking at adopted plans specifically for the parks, and then looking at the land use for semi-public land that's already in existence. So we break this apart and look at all these little different pieces. So we'll start with parks. So you have a level of service for your park land that's adopted in your comprehensive plan. It's based on your park district's parks plan. So for neighborhood parks, the level of service, and this is measured per 1,000 people, is 2.5 acres per 1,000 people. Well, between 2021 and 2041, we're going to see a growth of 790 some thousand people. 7,900 some thousand people. So that's 8 persons per 1,000 people. So a little multiplication, 2.5 times 8, that's a 20-acre land need for neighborhood parks. For community parks, the level of service is 5 acres per 1,000. So for nearly 8,000 new people, that's 40 acres. We've got 2 types of parks that are not included in here that we need to talk to your park district about because they didn't set a level of service for. And those are regional parks, and I forget what the other big type of park is.
It's citywide park.
Citywide parks. So we need to look at how those are identified in the parks plan and talk to the parks district folks and decide what can be justified in this analysis. Land for semi-public uses, the analysis is really similar. We looked at your existing developed acres for churches, and that's 85, almost 86 acres per 1,000 people in 2021. That's nearly 25,000 people, so 24.9. Currently, you have 3.5 acres per 1,000 people for churches, times about 8,000 people, and that's 28 acres of land need for that. For other semi-public uses, you've got a lot less land, 12 acres. You have a land need of 0.5 acre per 1,000 people, so that's 4 acres. So for parkland, we know we're looking at about 60 acres, plus the large parks, if there's need there. And then for semi-public uses, about 32 acres. So before
I have a question.
Yes, please.
Yes, Beth. Are any of the constrained lands considered available lands for park to meet that park requirement?
Well, I would assume that a lot of the constrained lands are on private properties. And so unless they're on publicly owned properties, I would say no.
Well, I know the city is has plans for trail systems on what I would call constrained lands. I mean,
trail systems are something really different than the types of parks that we're looking at here.
But they're not considered as part of the acreage.
They're essentially linear parks. Trail systems usually are. So there's specific characteristics to what's a neighborhood park. It's got a specific size and characteristics for what makes it a neighborhood park, like a location, X miles from, or X quarter miles or whatever from certain types of development. Community parks also have similar sorts of locational characteristics as well as characteristics themselves. Trail systems tend to be something different. And
those are funded differently than SDCs, or they're funded differently?
Oh, I'm not sure that they're funded differently necessarily, but the characteristics of them tend to be different. And how parks districts build them tends to be different. It may well be that Doug has some other comment that he'd like to make about how the parks system looks at development on constrained areas.
So Beth hit on it. The park district, acquires land in order to build the types of parks that are listed in their master plan. So neighborhood parks, pocket parks, neighborhood parks, community parks, regional parks, and so forth. Some of those parks may have a riparian area. but there's really limited about what you can do within our Goal 5 resources. So even when a park, the most recent park is like Friends Park. And so they had land, they got some additional land dedicated to them. When they improved the park, they did not do any improvements in the riparian area for a piece of property. It was dedicated to them. All the park improvements, the grass areas, the play structures, the parking lot and so forth is all on the upland area outside of those Goal 5 resources. And Beth hit on it, is when you look at the constrained map, is that those lands are privately held. And so the park district may have a master plan about a trail running up Hess Creek in the future, but that means they have to go acquire easements in order to build a trail. So they actually don't own it. They just have an access right to be able to use it for a trail in the future.
And that trail doesn't meet the same needs as, say, a neighborhood park or community park. Does that make sense to you, Corey?
A little bit, yeah.
Are there other questions? So then our next steps are to talk with different agencies and organizations. I think that Margaret probably has been in the middle of a number of calls to organizations like ODOT to understand whether they expect to have more land needs for the bypass or for any other ODOT facility. We've been talking with, I think, the city to make sure that the city doesn't necessarily plan to build, say, a new wastewater treatment plant. I'm joking, something very big and very complicated. It's undoubted that over the next 20 years, the city may need, say, to build a new pump station, but a pump station is pretty small. And it's not going to take, you know, half a dozen acres. So there'll be some things that are just, you know, outside of what we catch in this, because you can't really plan entirely for all of your public needs over the next 20 years. But the other big one is the school district. And from the discussions we've had with Doug, the school district is not expecting to purchase additional or need additional property for a new school over the next 20 years. And we'll be confirming that with the school district, of course.
Wow.
So we will continue to fill this in and explain piece by piece what each type of public or semi-public land need is addressing, and for which agency, that kind of thing, and give the best available estimate of that land need. And then we'll also have to look at where are these land needs met. So for instance, in many communities, churches are often in residential areas. Neighborhood parks are generally in areas that are zoned for residential uses. Commercial community parks may well be a little bit more mixed with commercial or residential, probably not in industrial areas. So we'll need to look at that mix and convert these acres into reasonable estimates of plan designations. And so that's what we're trying to do among these two different projects. One of them new, another one mostly a refresh.
Is there any, are we looking at all at rezoning non-residential lands to residential lands, or is that not part of this?
I don't believe that is part of this.
It is not part of this.
If the city needs an urban growth boundary expansion, then the discussion of rezoning land or land use efficiency measures, all of that would happen after these two projects conclude and the EOA is concluded.
Think of it this way, Charlie. There's 3 foundational pieces of information you need to initiate an urban growth boundary expansion. You need your economic opportunities analysis, your housing needs analysis, and your public, semi-public land need analysis. And that's what we're trying to get at is, do we have surplus or do we have deficiencies in all three of these categories?
So I think, I'm not sure where I saw this, but it sounded, I think I saw somewhere there was like a 20-acre surplus of commercial property. That would then show up in the economic, the EOA?
Yes.
Correct.
Okay.
But again, that was something we talked about at the orientation meeting. And I also indicated that within the next couple of years, that commercial land for that analysis that's shown as vacant, it could be developed. And all of a sudden we might be, 2-3 years from now, and we might be in a situation where we're in a deficit in commercial land. Because these are snapshots at a point in time.
They definitely are. That's their advantage and their disadvantage.
Okay. Oh, so just from the beginning of the meeting, Doug, can you send us the reports that you have to file with DLCD showing the number of permits by, use? I think it's, maybe that would, for the last.
Well, so we are not a community of 25,000 where there's another trigger where we have new reporting requirements. We're under the 25,000. What I have to report right now is based upon our cost burden. And there's a report, and it's online. If you go to HB, SB, what was the number of that one? I can't remember.
4006, I think.
Yeah, 4006. And so on the website, it has the annual reports that I have to submit to DLCD and Oregon Housing Community Services.
Okay.
Once we reach 25,000 in population, Newburgh will have a whole new set of reporting requirements to DLCD, but we're not quite there yet.
Keep you and Patrick busy.
Yep.
But I guess what seems weird to me is that the housing projection, the population projection is based on us having more than 25,000.
The population projection shows that inside of the urban growth boundary, which is different than the city limit. So the 25,000 people is triggered by the city limits population, not the urban growth boundaries population. Cities only get urban growth boundary populations once every 4 years with the population forecast.
So PSU's estimate of the population in Newburgh for 2020 was 24,045. So we're really close to 25, but we're not quite there.
Thank you for pointing out the difference. I didn't realize that. Thank you.
Certainly.
Thanks for asking the question, Charlie. That was a good catch.
No comment.
Are there other questions? I mean, I hate to let you guys go a whole 49 minutes early. I'm sure that you want to be looking at some more PowerPoints that are exciting.
We promise not to be heartbroken. I'll take the liberty of speaking for everyone.
Well then, Mr. Chair, that's all I have at this point.
Beth, we have one other thing on next steps is next meeting. So your next meeting, meeting number 3, Echo Northwest, Beth and Margaret will not be present for that one, but you will have me to try to explain it all to you. And then we have meeting number 4, and that will be the final BLI and the housing forecast. So those are the upcoming meetings, and even on your agenda, meeting number 3 is going to be on October 22nd. It's 6 p.m. and meeting number 4 will be on December 3rd, again at 6 p.m.
Oh, we look forward to it.
I always enjoy all of your company.
Well, thank you, Beth and Margaret, for putting this together. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Beth and Margaret
Certainly. Happy to have your questions.
and Doug.
Oh,
Not
I'm just color commentary. Mr. Chair, this is the point on the agenda. If there are any public comments. Kurt, you there?
He's muted.
All right. Well, I don't believe we have anybody. I can't see anybody on the list. So with that, since we're there, Kurt, you there?
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay, I got unmuted. All right, well, we thank Beth and Margaret, Doug, for your work on this, and we're moving along well. And thank you, everybody, for participating.
Welcome, Patrick, by the way.
Yes.
Welcome.
Are you getting used to Oregon?
Patrick was in Sisters for a number of years.
Okay, so he's, all right, that's right. He's familiar with Oregon.
He has to get mossy.
Oh, yes, yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm getting used to this area, but I love it out here. This is great.
Good. All right.
Well, we're at the point, Mr. Chair, for
I think-
adjournment.
I think we can adjourn
Okay.
for the rest of the evening.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you all.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye now.